Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Data Protection in the Hybrid Cloud. My name is Kyle Mullin. I'm the AVP of Data Center Solutions Architects. Let's go around the horn real quick, do some introductions. We have some great guests on the panel here today. We'll start with David No.
Hello, everyone. My name is David No. I'm CTO for Metallic at Commvault.
Thank you, David. Josh Haley.
Hey, everybody. I'm Josh Haley. I'm a Field Strategy Director for Cohesity.
Thank you. Josh Stenhouse.
Josh Stenhouse, Field CTO for Cyber Resilience at Rubrik.
Thank you. And lastly, Mark Sanders.
Hi, everybody. Mark Sanders, Global VP of Pre-Sales for Data Protection at Dell.
Great. All right, appreciate everybody's time here today. We got some great questions, great guests here, obviously. Let's start with one of the, I don't want to use the word obvious, but COVID-19, right? For the better part of 14 months, everybody's been working from home. So I guess how has the new work from home and hybrid models changed your customers' strategies, either internal or externally, over the past 14 months? We'll start with Mark from Dell.
So, COVID was an interesting scenario from a technology standpoint, right? People, massively working from home. From a data protection standpoint, specifically around cyber, right? It created a lot of additional attack vectors for the bad guys and gals to go after, right? Endpoints being one of those places. And we saw a big push for many of our customers, since they didn't have resources in the data center, big push to deploy new apps, new resources, new services in the cloud, right? And the massive adoption of cloud resources. You can see in the earnings from Microsoft and Amazon and Google, which is, creating some new things to the layered defense approach that customers need to take when, rethinking the way they approach DR and specifically cyber recovery.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying there's a lot of push to get applications out of the data center and into the public cloud.
Yeah, I mean, let's say an SAP deployment, right? You couldn't put people in your data center anymore, so you went and deployed that in, Azure or Amazon, and then, you weren't protecting, mission critical apps before in the cloud. So now what do you do? Now you've given everybody a laptop. How do you protect that? You've probably adopted, Office 365, or maybe you moved into another SaaS app like, I don't know, G Suite or something, and those are additional things that you need to figure out how you protect and how that creates a cohesive structure around your cyber resiliency plans.
Mm-hmm. Any of the Joshes or Dave, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll throw out a few things. So, some of the organizations that we deal with, they've been pretty significantly financially impacted by COVID. And so we've seen a lot of organizations that are, rapidly trying to figure out ways to reduce costs. I also see other organizations that have benefited from the work from home and more online services, and so they've had to rapidly scale. I do agree that there's been a really significant increase in the attack surface for organizations, but I also see that a lot of the customers that we work with, they're suffering from fatigue. 8-10 hours a day of Zooms and WebExes, and so some simple technology and flexibility of whether it's deployed on-prem as software or in the cloud is allowing organizations to sort of manage what they have and manage things more simply.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think the flexibility, simplicity aspect is important, especially as we've seen customers move from crisis mode to kind of coming back into steady state mode, or even accelerated transformation mode. I think customers accumulate a lot of technical debt initially by having to roll out a number of new services in very rapid fashion. And they were forced to adapt SaaS and cloud at a much accelerated rate over what they had been planning. And I think what's happening now is that customers saying, hey, we were able to do this. Cloud is not the devil, right? And convince other aspects of the business that accelerated transformation is actually the way to go. So flexibility and ease of deployment, ease of use, and something that matches the SaaS model as well. In addition, protecting things or being able to manage things on-prem as customers transition, we're finding that critically important.
Interesting. All right, I guess let's stay on that topic for a little bit of SaaS and Office 365. Everybody kind of pointed that out, that there's a dramatic shift to the cloud to move these applications out there. What are your customers doing differently to protect these applications on both the SaaS applications and the edge?
So we're seeing that customers are very much looking towards like for data protection for things like Office 365, right? You have a SaaS application. There are reasons why you pick a SaaS application, right? You want less management, less overhead, better TCO, scalability, things like that. And so looking at a SaaS data protection solution to match that application is important. In addition, one of the things that we've really seen is the adoption of Teams. I think everyone here probably uses it every day. And that's become even more of a critical app, I would say, almost than email. The collaboration and instant messaging, things of that nature are very important, and that becomes a critical part of a company's data protection strategy and resiliency strategy.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Go ahead.
I'd also add just a couple points. So I've seen a pretty substantial increase in the number of organizations that have moved to SaaS services. Many of their cloud strategies is SaaS first when possible. But we also see that although many of the SaaS platforms have some levels of native data protection, it doesn't always comply with the organization's actual requirements or compliance requirements. So we see a pretty strong demand for organizations that want to protect that data, sometimes externally in order to meet their requirements. But we also see that organizations, as they're in this even hybrid multi-cloud journey, that they really benefit from sort of a common data management and data protection control plane that spans from edge to core to cloud and even to SaaS.
Yeah, I mean, let's just level set that SaaS is growing faster than any other service in the cloud. I mean, if you look at all the charts and revenue, right, SaaS is projected to, super eclipse everything else from an ITaaS or any other service or PaaS offering, Salesforce, Azure, Google, et cetera, right? It's a juggernaut. And there's a lot of misconceptions that we're pointing out around. People believe there's data protection. The reality is when people ran Exchange on-prem, they had probably 6 copies of their data, right? You go to Azure, you got 1 copy. You need data protection more so. And, as we're pointing out, you have services like Teams and you have, sync and share, things that you want to figure out for SharePoint, right? There's a whole host of other services that most SaaS providers provide that become integral into making that SaaS app successful. Like for Salesforce, you have, their chat services as well. So, how does that work out into your data protection scheme? Like we all feel that you want a single solution, single vendor to protect all these things, but the reality is, you need to, as a company, figure out how that layer of defense works, right? How endpoint's going to associate, how you're going to protect your Exchange or your Salesforce or your on-prem app, and kind of what your recovery objectives are, and then how that equates to your overall DR and cyber resiliency strategy. These are the things that people are dealing with. Having a backup copy of your data is one thing, but having a strategy and the ability to execute the recovery when you have a massive outage where you don't have a network, you don't have Active Directory, you can't even connect to your SaaS apps, right? These are real problems that customers are getting hit with, that they're looking for real solutions and partners that can help solve these challenges. And that's the business we're all in.
It's true. And that's absolutely true, right? Being able to recover all aspects of your environment. You mentioned Active Directory. That's a critical one, right? Without AD, I think nothing works.
After you get hit by a cyber event, you don't even have an outbound network connection. Like, not a lot of companies think through some of these things. That what am I going to do? Where's my white box, jump box that doesn't sell on the network, it sits in the corner? Maybe it's, if you're lucky, you saran wrapped it or something, but it's probably just sitting in a box. If you have one that you bring online to bring Active Directory back up in the event that everything's done. I mean, a lot of people think about it. Like, if I move to the cloud, I don't have an internet connection, what is that going to do for me? Because I can't trust it. I can't trust my network. I got to recover my network, my Active Directory, then I can start doing stuff. These are the challenges that customers face, and that's what it does to help them.
All right, let's talk about it a little bit more then. Sorry, somebody want to answer that?
Okay, please.
let's talk about recoverability, right? In my opinion, I'm not sure if you guys agree or disagree here, but I'd say over the past 2 to 3 years, backup and disaster recovery are more or less mutually exclusive, right? Now we're seeing a convergence of the two, right? Talking to all of our partners here, I'm seeing a combination of DR and backup and data protection, right? Do you guys foresee backup and DR becoming one and the same over time?
I'll take this one. So I'd actually argue that it already has merged to the point where now the most likely DR event is a ransomware attack. And in that scenario, it is going to be a mass recovery from backup. And I spent 4 years at Rubrik and then 5 years prior at Zerto. And what I can tell you is that it was very, very rare. Like once per year, you might hear a customer actually invoked real DR. And now you're hearing on a monthly basis that customers are being attacked and the only thing left standing is their backup platform. And so I think it's already happened. It's just people haven't quite realized it. And one big thing that I'm advocating in the cyber resilience space is that, hey, with this DR background, everybody has a DR test, but who has a cyber resilience and recovery plan, let alone even a plan, never mind actually testing it and invoking it once per quarter to simulate an attack and simulate how you recover? I'd wager 99% of people listening to this call or watching this video probably haven't. And if you could take one action item, it would be, hey, let's sit down, build a plan, and then let's test it.
Yeah, I mean, the DR strategy of old, right? You go to some guy with your tapes, and once a year you do this horrible, test, and it always fails, right? And that was the old mantra. Unless you live in an area like maybe Southern California, where every year you have a fire, every year some businesses get impacted. It's very rare that natural disaster causes as many outages as the cyber event. Josh is 100%. I asked multiple customers, what do you think is more likely, a natural disaster or a cyber event? I'm going to have probably multiple cyber events within a calendar year that I need to deal with. And this idea that DR is this cold site and you tested it rarely, and now converging, if I'm going to have a real DR strategy, cyber needs to be really forefront, and I have to have a rock solid, how do I recover my, my foundation layer, right? Like we talked about, how do I recover networking configuration settings? How do I recover Active Directory? Forget, you need to get your foundation down before you start to recover your apps. And then you can go do your classic DR recovery, right? So there's an element of additional items that people weren't thinking through before that they now need to plan for, right? Some of the recent attacks, like the oil and gas attack, like how do I protect my OLP systems, right? How do I go, back up the configuration settings on my turbines, right? Or my pumps, right? And so there's a whole laundry list of things that customers weren't thinking through before. That now, when you re-strategize around, not only do I want an active ability to recover, not the classic dead data site, right? Unmanned site, maybe it's cloud people are leveraging. But I need to have that cyber resiliency run book, right? That allows me to get my foundation layer up, and then I start to recover my apps based on priority.
Yeah, and I think there are three things here really to consider, right? Is that the nature of disasters changed, right? Is that it's not necessarily site disaster or your data center catches on fire, unless you're that unfortunate MSP who did in fact have their data center catch on fire recently. It's much more an attack, whether internal or external. And so, traditional DR where you have a cold site or even a warm site, the problem is that that's probably going to be attacked too. So looking at what DR normally is, I think there is a place for both DR and backup and recovery from backup. And I think, while the technologies are converging and having a platform that spans those capabilities is important, the characteristics of DR are not naturally resilient to cyber attack or internal attack, right? That's where your backup comes into play. And so the functionality is slightly different, right? Even though the end goal might be similar. And it's important to make sure that your DR capability is resilient to those kinds of attacks, that there is a virtual air gap, that you have separate security domains, that the storage is protected because the ransomware is going to go after the backup software now first, right? And without that data, you've got nothing to go on. And if those things are converged and you have nothing to go on, then your DR plan is in trouble too. So you really have to consider, full resiliency end to end with a platform that can do those things and share the same stuff.
Right, isn't going to be enough anymore, right? Put the old adage, put a copy at least 50 miles away. That's not going to help you. Corruption there, right?
Yeah, but the one thing that
I guess
is
go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing that I'd add is that, many times we see organizations that are deploying different silos. There's the silo for backup and a silo for disaster recovery, which is additional infrastructure, both in the primary, it's additional bandwidth consumed for the replication, it's additional policy management domains. When you start to look at some of the technologies that are being added, most of the organizations we talk to are better than 90% virtualized, many better than 95% virtualized. VMware's added capabilities like CDP, or continuous data protection, which is an API that data protection providers can tap into to provide not only backups, but also journaling for recovery. And so now, although it looks like two different processes and two different streams, we can recover virtual machines nearly instantaneously, either in the primary site or the disaster recovery site. And we can do this with a single architecture and a single replication stream. So, customers are going to start to have options about consolidating these different platforms and silos, massively simplifying the recoverability to combat different scenarios, whether it's a ransomware attack, a site outage, an infrastructure failure. But they are all different scenarios that organizations need to be prepared for.
Let's be fair, right? I mean, your mission critical apps aren't applicable for that technology, right? Waiting for a circle loop for I/O of your app before it writes, you're right back to backups, right? The traditional approach for CDP is about 50% of your apps really need that continuous data protection. Just from Zerto, we've got products. VMware even has Datrium. I mean, that's, in my mind, kind of the tip of the spear if you're really going after that. Be able to do more recovery points, is always a good thing. But this idea that the technology that allows for this API integration, it doesn't answer all the needs that customers have. I think it's one part of the puzzle, but at the end of the day, it doesn't serve all needs that customers have, specifically around their high I/O, high change rate, and mission critical type databases. It just doesn't work for that.
Yeah, there is a place for that, but I think also the other consideration is the convergence of the storage, or the capability for DR and backup allows customers to leverage backups for more than just backups, right? And I think that's another key for them, is that there is an additional cost benefit here to be able to do their DR recovery from backups and have all the orchestration and failover, failback capability, and even replication capabilities built into that platform too. And so that's where they see a lot of advantages in that kind of synergy that could really benefit them.
What about the platforms themselves? I keep hearing immutability being thrown around from some of the vendors here as it's kind of that what makes them immune to these ransomware attacks. I mean, does anybody have anything to add around immutability from a security perspective?
Well, yeah, I've got to go this one, sorry. There's a common misconception with immutability where people think that, hey, if I make it immutable, that my backups cannot be deleted. Doesn't mean that. It purely means whether something is mutable or immutable. Can it be edited or not? So immutability is definitely an important part of protecting your backups from an attacker, because they can't modify them, they can't encrypt them. But you still need to protect them from being expired or deleted, which is separate. That's a retention lock. So you need immutability plus retention lock, and you need this on every copy of your data to ensure that you can recover locally, you can recover in a second site, you can recover in the cloud. So that's a key thing that I'm emphasizing to everyone: immutability plus retention lock, and it should be native and built in, not something that you turn on in a third site.
Yeah, and just to add, one of the things that David said earlier, which I thought just super important, is a lot of these attack vectors, they go after the data protection infrastructure. So they're either trying to dismantle the data protection environment, or they're trying to exfiltrate data from the customer's premises, or both. So it's really important to not only have immutability and technologies like Worm or air gap implemented, but strong security hygiene. Things like password complexity, multi-factor authentication. Some of the biggest attacks especially in sort of light of the SolarWinds attacks, could have been stopped completely by using multi-factor authentication as part of the data protection environment.
Yeah, listen.
There's a whole host.
Yeah, go keep going. It's good.
There's a whole host of platform hardening capabilities that are extremely critical, but it's also critical to have the ability to look through the protected environment and help detect when ransomware enters it. So there's just two different parts I think that, just absolutely critical. Harden the platform, make sure that that it's impenetrable, especially with root access. Root access control is key. And then being able to help detect when anomalous activity is happening in the customer's environment, whether that's from things like detection in the backups, whether that's granular comparison inside of Active Directory, even vulnerability scanning as part of data protection.
Sure, and I think that's. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to add. Listen, I think these are all valid points. I don't think any of us would argue immutability and hardening is not fundamental to a solution. The thing I'll point out that we're seeing, that at least I'm seeing it at my level, is that the average soak time of an attack is now over 100 days. Right? And you think most organizations have a 90-day clock on a password reset. So if the bad guys and gals are in your environment and they're in there for over 100 days, all the layers that you've created, you need to plan for the inevitable that they have root access to all your systems, including your backup app. And so how are you protecting yourself from an event that somebody actually has root access to your backup system? And what can they do if they have it, right? And so what Josh is pointing out is, how do you make sure that your mutable copy cannot be deleted? And one of the common areas where we're seeing some of this voiding happen is around an NTP clock source. And so, what are you doing to protect that immutable copy from someone manipulating the clock source? So you could have great plans. You could have your backup copy sitting in your own app, and it's got immutability. You have two-factor authentication. You got security officer over whatever. But if someone gets to your NTP clock source, they change it to 10 years from now, all your stuff's going to automatically expire. There's really nothing you can do. And that's kind of one of the crucial things that people overlook. And it's one of the areas that Dell has strived to make some strides. I'm sure others are working on similar things, but at the end of the day, for me, it's mutability, isolation of your data, and then intelligent AI ML tools to help you identify preemptively. And then the inevitable, you're going to get hit. And then how do you identify what's a good clean copy to recover from?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things for me, the 3 I's.
Absolutely. I think a lot of our work is focused around that too, especially coming back to not only detection as well as identifying a good recovery point, very granularly too. I mean, if you recover, it's almost as bad to recover everything back to some point in time. That's you're losing a whole chunk of your business, right? At some point too. So identifying the right data to bring back is quite critical. Making sure your backup copy is clean is also critical. But I think the point actually is that having a multi-layer, multifaceted approach to this is quite important, right? Not just the backup infrastructure, but as Mark pointed out, things like security separation and being able to make sure that your storage is well protected, even from malicious insider. And I think at some point those two things converge, right? Malicious insider as well as external breach, because they're essentially the same, just slightly different actors, right? But the access is the same. So how do you make deleted or destructive actions visible? How do you have multiple people approve those actions? Kind of like nuclear launch codes, right? No single person can launch a nuclear strike, right? How can you have separate responsibilities? Someone who controls, say, your cloud storage account separate from your administrators of your backup application, right? Those things are critical in making sure you put up the right walls between different roles and responsibilities in case you do get breached, in case you do have what the nightmare scenario, as pointed out, is the SolarWinds breach, right? You have multiple administrative accounts that have been compromised. Right.
Well, I mean, remember the Microsoft, attack vector, the zero login issue they had, where you just feed a domain controller zeros and spits out the admin credentials? That was well known by the attackers for months before Microsoft even made that public. That's scary as all can be to all of us. And the reality is, issues like that are going to continue to happen. Right? And SolarWinds is just like the tip of the iceberg. So the strategy I think that our customers need to take, and the advice that we're given at Dell is, you need to think of the worst case scenario where you have the control of nothing. How do you have a copy of your data that you actually still control? I'm not saying nothing's available, but the bad guys are going to get in, and you've got to figure out a way that you're making a copy of your data that you still control. Ultimately, what you don't want to do, and the only way this is going to end, is if we can get enough of the population in a place where they don't have to pay the ransom. People stop paying ransoms, this business won't keep going on. But right now, it's a multi-trillion-dollar business. CNA paid a $40 million ransom. I mean, if I'm a criminal, I'm recruiting bright people out of high school. I mean, this is $1 billion business that these people are in. And until we stop paying these ransoms because we have a copy of the data we still control and we can recover from an event no matter how bad, then this is never going to end. I mean,
and Mark,
where do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. I mean, why do you keep doing this? Because there's money here.
yeah, but Mark, just to add to it, so a number of the ransomware gangs are actually federally sanctioned entities, which means that last October, the U.S. Department of Treasury came out and said that there's the potential that they will seek fines for organizations that pay the ransom.
Yep. It could be illegal too to pay them, but people are still going to pay them if they have no recourse. They're going to face the charges. Yeah. It's going to get messy.
Sorry, guys. I apologize, Mark. I don't mean to cut you off. We got 5 minutes here left. I want to get to the last question. This is great stuff, awesome stuff. We can spend hours talking about this. But I'm sure you guys all agree with me. CDI's customers are looking for the ability to rapidly ship, deploy, and manage applications. Right. We talked about the platforms themselves, so let's talk a little bit about the applications. Right. So customers want that agility. They're looking towards containers, specifically Kubernetes, to get them that agility. Where do you see your customers leveraging Kubernetes today, and what, if any, issues are they experiencing when rolling Kubernetes out in the environment?
I'll go real fast. There's two choices, right? You either put your data inside the container or you're running your database externally, right? So, you have a lot of choices. It's kind of like going back to the old SharePoint days. Do I stick my data in the blob database or do I reference it externally? And then, container backups just like an image backup. So it's kind of early days. But we're seeing a lot of customers enjoy the flexibility of the container strategy, be able to port it to multiple locations, multiple clouds. So getting your strategy right, whether you're putting databases internally or externally, most of us out there have a strategy to be able to accommodate that. But my perspective of what I'm seeing customers do is deploy more non-traditional applications inside containers, right? So Mongo, Cassandra, some Postgres, and kind of retooling their applications. I'm not seeing classic SQL or Oracle being stuck into a container.
Yeah, but I'm seeing, so as organizations sort of really start to embrace Kubernetes, they find that it allows them to be, deploy on-prem, in the cloud, hypervisor agnostic. It also allows capabilities like dynamic and auto scaling. So people really like the premise from a value perspective of what they can do with it. But where it started out as stateless, we're seeing more and more move to stateful applications, which require, instead of a config management approach to being able to redeploy, now it also includes the need for granular levels of data protection. So we've seen a pretty large adoption of organizations looking to protect their Kubernetes estate. And we're going to continue to see that as they look to move more stateful applications, again, on-prem or in the cloud.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you see is some companies who are fully embracing the move to Kubernetes, and so they have to refactor their applications. That's an investment I think that people don't think about when they think about containers. They go, oh, there are all these migration tools, right? I can just move my apps to containers, great. And then you have all the same problems as before, right? It doesn't really get you a whole lot. But when you do refactor the applications, very often you have a situation where you don't have DevOps, right? You have Dev and Ops, right? And so you have developers who are tasked with deploying these apps and making them resilient, and they have no money or resources or consideration to properly protect them, right? People haven't thought about it. And so they're running
operational problem, right?
Yeah, they're running scripts that they don't understand how to actually protect those applications in production. And often the business is scrambling afterwards to catch up for compliance reasons, right, or what have you, or general data protection requirements, right? And so you see that problem both in the cloud and on premises. You see migration problems moving an app from one platform to another, say from on-prem to cloud, from test to prod, and those issues are kind of increasing as customers look more and more to Kubernetes and how to adapt their applications to run on it.
Great.
Yeah,
I think I apologize. I know you guys have a lot to add, but I think we're at time here, unfortunately. I think next time we're going to tell Alyssa to give us an hour, because you guys were fantastic today. So I sincerely appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for joining today, and we'll talk soon.
Kyle and everybody, real pleasure.
Thank you.
Have us.
It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you very much, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks all.